Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I just had a few quick updates before we get to the meat of the episode and all the tolerating that we do here on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. So, I hope that you've heard that we have a Patreon, and now we have added a goal to get 25 Patreon members supporting the show. Once that happens, I have some cool perks planned out to release. Spoiler alert, one of them is a pen pal program because I love mail and I love putting stickers on envelopes. So head to the link in the show notes, head to the Patreon, and consider joining us and all the fun we could be having. Also, every Tuesday on Instagram Live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, we are partnering with Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous to bring you Still Comfy with Jules and Nat. It's a show where we're looking at our comfort TV shows and movies to see if they still make us feel warm and gooey on the inside. So check it out. And I can't wait to see you, whether it's on Patreon, Instagram, or in the DMs. Love you all. Thanks for being here. Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, the show where my guest and I chat about how we're onto the patriarchy and refuse to be tricked by its games. Today, my guest is Caroline Addington. She is the host of the podcast Co-Create, where she is doing an awesome job recognizing humans on the planet, creating and building their best lives. Thanks so much for being with me today, Caroline.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm super hyped to jam out.
Thank you. I am too. So I realize now in my intro, I forgot to write down the actual topic, but we're going to be talking about the men in our lives who truly, truly believe that they're enlightened to the point where they use it to abuse us.
So well said.
Yeah. They just truly believe. Like, I have a friend, so many friends. I mean, I'm in the Midwest, so like the big red flag for me is when a guy will just like lean in real close and be like, I need you to know, I support women. I value women and I care about women and I support women. And I was like, really? Let's talk about your voting history. I'm going to start doing to men what they do to us when we tell them that we like a sport or a Marvel movie. And I'm going to be like, name 3 women-driven charities that you've donated to. Go on.
I love it. I love it. No, I love the leaning in and I need you to know.
Right.
Like that in and of itself, I feel like you're like, uh-oh, what's coming? Good things are coming.
And I'm like, what did I do to like really make you so fragile that you had to hover over me with your body? And because I'm sure I just said something along the lines of, man, I wish birth control was more accessible in this country. And then someone got fragile because they thought it was their fault. And they had to be like, now, Natalie, I hope you know that I too don't want you to have a baby. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is how it manifests in my life. Like, it's the bare minimum of them just telling me that they try really hard to be enlightened and an ally and all of it. What are some of the behaviors that you've noticed from this brand of man?
Yeah. Well, and like, I think it happens because I also went through this particular phase when I was like, oh my God, I'm more than my body. And I'm more than like all the bullshit that I tell myself about who I am. And then that society tells me about who I am. Because that's really what it is. It's like, we take on all this stuff and then we repeat those stories to ourselves. And I know for sure when I was like, oh my God, I'm more than all of this, then I was a bit of an asshole for like a hot minute, and I'm sure like, God bless the people in my life who tolerated me, but it seems like it's something that's maybe a little bit harder for men to shake when they have that like chapter, like if you want to call it an awakening experience, you know, for lack of a better word, I think it's a little bit harder to shake because one of the stories that's so ingrained is like, you know, being on the high, you guys can't see me, I'm doing things with my hands, being on the highest pedestal, you know what I mean? And like having all the answers and knowing all the things and being the more trusted resource in air quotes in our
The
society,
authoritative
the
voice in the room.
authority. Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. So then that bleeds over into like, oh, and so now I'm going to just take this authority complex and like overlay it on top of like the spirituality conversation,
Right.
you know?
Like
Yeah.
I've heard you say that you support LGBTQA plus rights, and I'm going to tell you all about the 2 gay people I know and why that makes me an expert in their culture.
Right. Or like even more like close to home and like personal is like, oh, you are a triggered woman or whoever, you know,
Yes.
like whoever it is, you seem triggered. And so you need to, you know, XYZ, whatever about your trigger. When really like it's a, the,
No.
I mean, sometimes we all contribute to an interaction 100%, but you can also like, sometimes you can be 100% like in your clear-headed space, and this person is having some kind of like crazy reaction, and then they're saying, oh, you're triggered or you're triggering me, and like something is wrong with you, like putting all of that, projecting all that blame onto anyone else. Yes. Basically female presenting or otherwise.
Something in the energy, I think, just triggered one of my friends because he Snapchatted me, and I'm like, do you know that I just literally called you out on one of your behaviors? Like, did you feel
on the podcast? Like they literally just Snapchatted you right now?
Yeah, they did. And I'm like, shit. Like sometimes I'm like, are you all clued in? Did you bug my house? Like, yeah, I swear. And it's so funny that you also like brought it home to yourself, because we do that on the podcast too, where it's like, I have also, believe it or not, been an asshole.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, dude, 100%.
And part of the healing journey when it comes to deprogramming is that you've believed all of these things about yourself and the world that you live in. And then when you wake up and it's a lie, to like try and make a great relationship back with your mind and your soul and your country, you're like, everything is the opposite then. Yeah. Everything is the opposite, and I'm right and you're wrong. And I need you all to know that you've bought into the lie. So many times I tell people, I'm like, sounds like you've bought into capitalism. And they're like, how much did you spend on stickers on Amazon today? And I'm like, we weren't talking about me. We were talking about how you don't think minimum wage should go up. So it is such a humbling process to not only deprogram your brain, but to also come to terms with how you played a role in the broken systems for so long. Yeah. And I get why they get insecure, because I get insecure. Like the first time I filled this house with crystals and started doing yoga and like buying myself my first yoga mat, I was like, I don't know. Am I this type of girl? I guess I am.
Right, dude. And like, coming from, my background was in science. So my first like chapter of human life here on earth, well, I guess the first one was being a little baby child, but my first chapter of adulting was in the science world. So I totally resonate with that. Was when I started like being like exploring the metaphysical world and like, you know, things beyond just like what I was doing in my experiments in the lab, you know, and like peer-reviewed papers and all this shit. I was like, am I crazy? And that too is, I think also, you know, we're taught to think that when we start to explore things that are maybe outside of like what we've been conditioned to buy into, they were crazy. And that whole structure kind of keeps the funky shit alive, you know, it keeps feeding into it. But there's like, breaking out of that mold and then being like, nah. And so what if I'm crazy? Like, seems a hell of a lot more joyful, and I like it a lot better, and it suits me a lot better. So,
and I think another
capitalism seems crazy. Patriarchy seems fucking crazy.
Literally woke up today and the whole world had just topsy-turvied on whether or not women deserve rights over their body. And I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing today. This is where we're at. And that's fine. I'm gonna have some comments about it when I collect myself, but it's okay. I also find that a trap that I and other people who have become so awakened to everything that they've been lied to about as a child is they'll hold on to one piece of information, and that is the information that they build their entire argument around. And when you go, okay, but we've also evolved in how we think about that, they go, no, the purple candle does this, and it's what I built my entire life around. And I'm like, okay, that's great. We've also decided that that is something that we colonized from someone else's culture, so we can't do it anymore as privileged people. And they're like, but I built my entire life around it. And
I think that's such a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like that's how we get sucked into things, is when we like there's a quote from someone who is dead, and I can't remember who it is, but if I remembered, I would credit them, about how like there's nowhere to stand, you know. And that's what that reminds me of, is like, as soon as we start to be like, oh, I'm gonna stand here with this purple candle, or like find some home base and like take it on and then build around it, we start to build a trap for ourselves. And I think, to go back to like woke dudes, you know, is like that authority and expertise ground that they've been building around for so long can be just a really deep root that needs to get pulled all the way up.
And we do reinforce it, because it is like they come in and they suck out all of the energy in the room, and they're loud and they're authoritative, and they're like, I've decided that the candle is fine and you should jump on board. And you're like, I don't know, should I get that candle back out? He said it was fine. And I think with the pedestal thing, it plays so much into humility, because the human experience is such a humbling one, because you will believe something for decades, and then you have to realize, oh, through no fault of my own, the behavior that I took part in, I have to do it all the time because I was a teacher in the American education system. And I'm like, through no fault of my own, the things that I did damaged children, because I was told that this was the way to do it. And I think when it comes to men, no one has taught them how to navigate humility, and that it's okay to feel like that initial shame of it. I feel like their shame gets so linked up with anger, and like they're so indignant about it. And it's like, no, I can't be wrong, because I did it for 7 years, and for 7 years it was fine. And it's like, that's okay, because you had no idea. And so it's like talking to a kindergartner. That's how I end up talking to these guys. Like, I just strip it all down and I go, everything that you've said has value. I notice that you're very angry right now. So I want to let you know that it's okay to make a mistake. And we do it all the time. Watch, I'm going to knock over this glass of water and nothing's going to happen. And it's all going to be okay.
That's such a beautiful point that you made, though, around like learning how to navigate humility. You know, because I think that's such a true statement, is like, if we don't know how to navigate humility as a human, then like we stay stuck in the same loop over and over again. You know, like we were saying earlier, that the complexes just get overlaid on top of a new conversation that gets called spirituality or enlightenment or whatever. And like, that being able to navigate humility is what keeps us as humans from just repeating the same thing, wearing a different costume.
Yes. And I think so many of the structures that we have in place want you to absolutely turn your back on humility. Like,
Totally.
could you imagine the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world getting to own social media apps with humility? No. So we see these people and they're so successful. And capitalism is all about what you're putting in and the product that you're giving society and all of it. And it has to be the best, and it has to be the biggest, and it has to be the most expensive. So humility is so against, I've had a hard time with humility, because as soon as you admit that you're wrong, it's a point of vulnerability. And we don't live in a world where it's easy to be vulnerable.
Or safe to, or socially safe to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
When I first left Science Life, I had an athletic wear company that like failed with flying colors in like so fast, And there was like a Kickstarter behind it. There was like a whole like community movement behind it. And it just like absolutely tanked because I had no fucking clue what I was doing. And it was like so like profoundly uncomfortable to be that wrong and fail that hard in like a community setting.
Yeah.
And I think that, like our social fabric doesn't have like safety nets in place for big failure experiences, which would be such a beautiful thing, because when we can like flop on our faces as humans and like really like face in the mud, I mean, there's no better teacher for humility and also like, just learning how to navigate loss and disappointment and like the sense of failure,
Yeah. It hasn't come out yet, but there is an episode about adult friendships and how hard it is to navigate platonic relationships as an adult. And I think so much of it is, so I have an ownership of my mental health and my emotional health, and I have to take care of myself. But sometimes that means that you will be disappointed in me. And how do I bridge that?
Yes.
And so much of the way that our society is made up leans itself to codependency, where it's like, it's basically a crime to disappoint the people that you love. And I think when you're learning something like a new spirituality, or you're trying to be a better ally, or you read White Fragility and checked it off your list and went, I did it though, I think you go right back to that vulnerable point where you're so volatile that to be told, okay, well, you didn't do enough, and this is how I still ended up insulted by you. And they're like, what do you mean I still disappointed you? But I did the work. And in this country, when I do the work, I get the accolades. So why are you still pushing me?
Yeah. I am stoked to hear that episode when it comes out about adult friendship, because I think we should normalize disappointing each other sometimes. Yeah. And I think that especially with, I'm thinking of like the cis, het white dude, like you gotta like have, at least I'm like, man, like I'm giving a big bear hug, because that I don't know, what are the words that I'm looking for? Like, I think the shame and the burden, the internal like psychic burden that they carry around the idea of disappointment and disappointing other people is so huge that like the fear and the walls up around that they put up around themselves to protect themselves from that experience are so thick.
And I think the difference is when they put up those walls and they hide away from their insecurities and the shame of it all, we applaud them because it's like, oh, you're so strong. And then when women or people who are not cisgender white men put up boundaries, we're overly emotional and we're cold and we're distant. and we're ruining the family structure all of a sudden. And it's such a juxtaposition of all of the expectations we put on ourselves are shitty. And we never talk about like, okay, but why do you feel so pressured to be right? And then like, we just never have that cathartic moment where we're all just holding hands and crying.
Yeah.
And I've begged my friends to do it about like COVID and the pandemic. And they're like, we're still in it though. We can't hold hands and cry about all the trauma we've experienced because it's still happening. And I'm like, I guess you're right. But I really look forward to that cry session that we'll all
You can
have.
cry as the trauma's happening so that it doesn't become so dramatic.
And again, I understand where we get how this happens, but it's so tricky to come across one of these men in the wild because your head like goes to like a 45-degree angle and he's mansplaining to you all of the things that you've read 8 books about because he's assumed that he's the first person to link up rose quartz with healthy love relationships. And you're like, okay, I've been wearing rose quartz in my bra for a year, but tell me more.
Well, my favorite, I'll share like a personal experience, personal story. It's like, because I think that this was when I was like, wait, what? There's like something especially off with this whole like complex that's happening. I was at a music festival one time with friends, and we passed a like women's tent, like a women's circle. They were having like a women's gathering, and a friend of a friend who's a dude wanted to be in the women's gathering, and they were like, nope, this is women only, or female presenting humans only. And he got all upset about it, not towards them, but like in our we kept walking, and then it became a whole conversation, and he was so upset about it. And I was trying to like, talk through have the conversation, talk through the conversation. And it was just like pulling hairs, and eventually got to the point where he was like, I think I understand why they need the women's circle. And I was like, tell me. He's like, they're so triggered by me that I can't be there because I'll disrupt the healing work. And that was the point at which I was just like,
you did it.
Carry on. I'm done with this conversation because it's like a circular thing. So, it's that feeling of like you're saying, like that not being able to get through that wall, in order to really get down to the core of it.
My favorite brand of TikToks to not comment on are the ones where men are surprised that we're scared of them in parking lots. They're like, I was just walking, and all of a sudden a woman started like sprinting away from me. And I went, me, a safe guy? You're going to run away from me because we are alone in this parking lot? And it never hit me that even though you've all written articles and did TikToks about it, and it's all over the media that women can't walk alone anywhere, it never really hit me until today when I had to feel shame about it, that you are actually afraid of me. And then like to watch them just get like hundreds of thousands of likes and pats on the back, I go, he didn't do anything.
But on some level, like there was a little tiny, like, poke through the wall. It's like feeling the shame.
Yeah.
And not shame as in like you specifically, human, did something wrong in that parking lot, but feeling that like, oh shit, like you were saying about education, and like when I felt after I left science, and I was like, oh my God, how many mice have I killed for what? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it contributed to this. It's the shame of like, I didn't know that I was complicit with this system. And I think that like that moment of like, I felt something, like that is like a little bit of like all right, you making moves,
And so, as you can imagine, the title of the podcast is very popular with some groups of people, and then it is very disheartening to some groups of people. And I have had men, straight men, white men approach me and go, I would like to talk. I would like to partner up with you in your podcast so I can support you. And I would like to know how you're comfortable with me doing that. And we can have a dialogue about it. And then I have lovely men who slip into my DMs and be like, you think you have trauma? Have I ever told you that women have also hurt me? And I should be on your show because that is important too. And it's the same with the women's circle where it's like, here's the thing. You guys get to say your voice and your piece a lot. I am trying to create a safe space where we get to take you out of the screaming and we get to rail a little bit about the things that systematically happen to us.
Yeah, it's like removing a huge influential variable, you know? It's like yeah, I love the way that you said that, is like taking that out of the equation,
Yeah.
you know? Because then you can hear things a little bit just more clearly and differently, you know, where all of a sudden this voice isn't in the head. It might still be in the psyche, but it's not like in the ears, you know, and you can kind of create some distance and a more of a relationship with it.
What I always hope is that people understand that I know that everyone has trauma and I know that everyone has healed and made progress and all of it. But your trauma doesn't have to be in every space to be valid. And my trauma being shed light onto also doesn't diminish the fact that you have also experienced hurt and pain.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I need to like form just like an automated message that I can send to the people where it's like, I hear you, I understand. And that must have been really hard. However, my space isn't the correct space for this. And we can get into it if you want to argue with me about it, or you can take all of that energy and find the space that is the correct avenue for this.
Yeah. Yeah. And the space that allows it to like change and evolve and grow and heal and move beyond it instead of like continuing to loop in it, you know?
And then when it comes to like I'm so conscious about how enlightened and how much I've grown, and now I'm going to impart that all onto you, not knowing your journey. I just feel like sometimes it's because you've called them on something and they immediately want to backtrack on their behavior. And they're like, no, because you don't realize that I am a good person. And here are 10 reasons why. And we talk a lot about society's just ironclad grasp on the binary, where it's like you did one thing wrong and now you're a bad person that I don't want in my life anymore, and how that keeps us up at night. Like everyone's just keeping score in their brains on like whether or not you're a good person, when in all honesty, you can make a mistake in front of me. I can walk you through that mistake, and then tomorrow we can still get mimosas.
That needs to be like a sticker. Yeah. 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 Well, and those are the most like, you know, when I think about, you know, a conscious relationship, you know, to use the overused term, but a conscious relationship, that's actually it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not like knowing what rose quartz does or knowing what triggers are or knowing that trauma is a thing. It's not like knowing it intellectually. Yes. It's like, hey, there was a moment here that was really sticky and I actually let my wall down and we actually had a conversation about it and we both actually came out the other side stronger and better and more whole. That's a conscious relationship. Yes. That's actually it.
That sounds like something I've never experienced. Healthy communication. And I love that, because that was exactly where I was going next, about like when your growth and everything that you know just lives in your brain because you've read a lot about it or you've done a deep dive about it or whatever. So you think that you have fixed the problem in your life because it's like, now I know. And it's like awareness is kind of just like the first step. And then
100%.
there's like, then you have to like actually do something about it. So
Yeah.
if you have to sit across from a table from me and go, well, I support, and then fill in the blank of any marginalized person we have in our society, and I didn't already know that, or you had to scream it at me, I don't actually believe that you've actually shown me that you support that group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's so funny. When I was certain chapters in my business and in like doing the things, I would say like, oh, this is, I'm trying to think of like a concrete example, but it's more just like an energy that was in my marketing for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
where I was like, oh, this is what this does. And this is like, I promise like that you'll have these experiences. It'll be all this awesome stuff. And I was like, why are you shouting this from the rooftop? Like,
Mm-hmm.
let it just be. I think that so much, if you look at, and this is like getting off on a tangent, but my brain,
No,
goes,
mine too.
but it's the ADD. But if you look at like marketing and business things too, like you'll see that all the time where
Mm-hmm.
someone is like shouting from the rooftops about what everything does and is in their business, which I think is, if you take joy from shouting, then by all means go ham. But like a lot of the times when you're just living it all and people are experiencing, that same magic through what you're up to.
Yeah.
The same thing. It's like it. So anyway, that is like a rabbit hole.
Well, and it's such a delicate tightrope because there's being proud of yourself, and like I fall into that trap too, where I'm always like, who celebrated me today? Sometimes it's just me.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes it's barely the cat, but who celebrated me today? And then wanting to shout like, I did the thing, I did the hard thing, and now I want to express it to you because I did it. And if no one acknowledges it, is it real? And then also going the complete opposite end where it's like, okay, well, you learned the thing, but now you're just encroaching on what I'm trying to learn or impeding on my growth or my journey and all of it. And it is such like, especially in marketing, because it's like you have to get the word out there and you have to be like, my podcast changing the world, did you know? And but you also like can't, I'm so scared of being the voice of authority on anything where I'm like, what do you mean? Just because I talked about something, now you believe me? I believe that's on you. I don't know.
I think that's healthy to be like, come and listen, but take it all with a healthy like grain of salt and like a healthy dose of skepticism, because that's when we like are genuinely, standing on our own 2 feet, and we're not relying on other people's experiences to, we can learn from each other's experiences, but when we're relying on someone else's experiences, that's when things get a little hairy.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a healthy level of skepticism that you're gifting everybody.
Thank you. My new motto, and I think it's like a direct like hit against my growing up as a high ability child who had all the pressure in the world on her as an oldest daughter to just be good. But not be loud about the fact that you're good. Like you also have to be humble, because that's also the weight that we put on women. It's like, be perfect, but don't let anyone know. Like,
yes. And I grew up in South Carolina, so it was also like, be polite.
Right. Be polite.
Like, oh God. Okay,
love white Jesus. But do it softly and don't draw attention to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a direct result of that is now one of my new mantras that I will just like flat out tell people when they're like, oh, you didn't know such and such. I'll be like, I refuse to know all of the things. And they'll just look at me and I go, how dangerous would it be if I, Natalie Katona, one person, knew all of the things? It's unsustainable for my brain, for my heart, for everyone else, for me to be the voice of authority over all of it.
Yeah, and literally impossible.
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I think the way that we know things is through living them.
Yeah.
And we can only live the one life that we're in right now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
like I will never know all the things you know because I haven't walked in your shoes. So
Exactly. This is Natalie Katona, host of the podcast To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. Are you a business owner that would like to start advertising on podcasts and want to work one-on-one with the podcast host to craft the perfect message for your business on an episode? Well, you're in luck. I'm a one-woman operation, and I have ad space open on future episodes of To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. If you are interested in learning more about booking an ad with our show, please email me at menivetoleratedbefore@gmail.com. Thanks, and I can't wait for our future collaborations. What are some other, do you have other concrete examples of what these guys look like in the day-to-day life of someone who's literally just trying to thrive in their own vibe?
Another one that I see often is like this divine masculine, divine feminine situation.
The binary of it all.
And I think that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like this added pressure that I think, male presenting humans get added on top of their shoulders when it comes to carrying the load, for lack of a better word, like with air quotes. And I think that kind of can get overlaid on top of the concept of divine masculine, where it just is this like, super strong lion energy that's like kind of like a hyped up masculine that I'm thinking of. Okay, there's this I lift. Okay, I'm getting on a sidetrack, but we're gonna come back.
Okay,
I love weightlifting, and it's one of my happy places, one of my happiness habits. And there's this bodybuilder out in the world that like randomly popped into my like Instagram feed last week. That is like quintessential, personification of this divine masculine that's like kind of gone awry. This like, hyper masculine jacked dude that's posting on Instagram in like totally culturally appropriated garb and like, environments, and with like attitude of gratitude caption, what I mean? That like doesn't ever really go much deeper. And I'm not in his life. I don't know him, obviously, but the energy that I get from it is this like, it's just another mask that gets worn, that's kind of labeled divine masculine, instead of really getting deeper into that conversation and playing with like, well, what is the essence of like masculine, feminine energies? Just because masculine has more of an action oriented tendency in some of the like, old teachings and stuff like this, doesn't mean that that's all it is. And that you need to now go and be hyper action oriented or anything like that, and it's the recognition that all of it is within every single one of us.
Yeah. And I think a great book that I think I plug to friends all the time that really made me understand how my feminine and my masculine commingle, because we made up those terms anyways, is A Guide to Gender, because my friend and I challenged ourselves to understand the spectrum that is gender, because we didn't want to be ignorant people walking around in the wild trying to like awkwardly ask people about pronouns and what these terms mean, because it's not up to the marginalized person to give me a vocabulary lesson. They were just trying to go to Spider-Man that day. And I'm like, excuse me, I have a question. So we had to read a book. And I think, especially with the divine masculine and the divine feminine, there's so much pressure to honor that every day. It's like, ooh, how did I honor my inner goddess? And it's like, okay, that's a lot. And maybe it was literally eating ice cream. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Well, and you're right that like they're words that we made up, that have like gotten all befuddled with like reproductive organs. You know what I mean? Like, but that it's actually, the two words are they're these, it's this ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least this is how I experience like the masculine and the feminine energy as a spectrum. In my body, this is how I experience it, is this ebb and flow of like the creative process, that like you have to receive ideas from God knows where, your subconscious, the world around, who knows, the spirit that wanders around, who knows, you like receive the ideas, you let it percolate, you let it be a little bit chaotic, a little bit like, just brainstormy. And then you take that, you organize it, you put it out into the world in some way, and like you make something,
Mm-hmm.
and that process, it has, that feminine energy and that masculine energy in it. So we all are always making things, whether it's through words or through art or through whatever, even if we don't identify as being creative, like we're always doing that. And so those energies they're just energies that are alive in everyone all the time. Right. We don't need to go have like a ritual for the divine feminine.
And again, with the humility and having a conversation about like how what you learned and deprogrammed in your brain can coexist with what I also had to deprogram in my brain, it can be both. Both of those realities can live on the same timeline or in different variants of the timeline, because I love the Loki TV show, and it can all be chill. Yes. What I think we fall into a trap in, and that Instagram post made me recall the connection between consumerism and capitalism, and how easy it is to get attention because you've bought all of these things, and because you invested money into it, it's like, oh, well, you must have studied all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to take that, because I am obsessed with thinking and talking about consumerism. That's like my main, that's what my business is like primarily focused on right now. So I'll try not to go all the way down the rabbit hole. If I'm getting too hyped, to be like, okay, rein it back in.
No, it's fine. We hate capitalism.
Yeah. Like at the core of consumerism, when I think about consumerism, I really think of it, it's this like cycle that we get sucked into where we're like, I'm feeling something that feels hairy or sticky or uncomfortable. So I'm going to like turn outside myself, buy something, eat something, binge watch something, do something in the outside world to try and get rid of whatever I'm feeling instead of just feel it. Exactly. And I think that like, I think like bodybuilding dude who's like quote unquote woke on Instagram is oftentimes portraying an image of a life that doesn't include discomfort, doesn't include sadness, doesn't include all the sticky parts of life. And so it continues to feed that cycle where people are like, oh, maybe if I go, do plant medicine or live in this part of the world or buy that weird looking scarf, then I'll also be free of discomfort, because he seems to be pretty happy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just filling the hole with a trinket. It's like, I got a trophy because I worked on myself. It's like when I would leave therapy and immediately get myself a cheesy gordita crunch. I'd be like, time for my sad taco. Yay. And the Taco Bell people had to hear me call it a sad taco one time. I was like, I did good. And I cried during therapy. And now I get a sad taco. And that's literally how people build beliefs around their lives. They're like, yep, I've made a rule in my brain. When I cry at therapy, cheesy gordita crunch. Did it.
Honestly, I love that idea. I'm like,
yeah. And we've been taught that the more trinkets and trophies you have surrounding your belief system, the more invested and like committed you are to that. And honestly, sometimes it's just that I like shiny rocks. They just make me feel fun to look at.
Yeah. And so like, I think it's such an amazing human skill, you know, to be able to look at the trinkets that we've collected and be like, okay, and if I really wanted to, I could burn it all down. You know what I mean? And like, just kind of like maintenance burn, if you will, where it's like, I've got 3 trinkets. Am I making these trinkets mean something about me and like who I am and what my life is? Or could I let them go, you know?
Yeah. Oh, it's the hyper focus of it all for me, where it's like I junk journal now, and that's the only thing that I do. And it's the only thing that I can do while I watch TV because I bought all of these stickers. And I have to do something with them because they arrived. And when it comes to like being in a relationship with these type of people, it frustrates me because it's like you dipped your toe and then you went, I'm done because I dipped my toe in there. And it's like, you didn't learn how to swim though. And they're just like, but in my brain, I did. I conquered the sea.
Yeah. For me, I'll just speak from like my personal, because I won't put this on anyone else, but I know for me, like there are a small number, and by small, I mean 2 male presenting humans in my life where it's always worth it, because I know that with these humans, the love for our relationship goes deeper than any ego thing that might be going on. So like, I've chosen that it's like, okay, with these humans, when you know, things get funky, we sit with it and we do the things. And I will always gladly do emotional labor for 2 male presenting humans, unless a third comes along and really convinces me that they're awesome, you know? But outside of that, if someone out in the wild is like basically asking me to do the emotional labor of like going down that rabbit hole with them, like that's a boundary that I've drawn where I'm like, I love you, human, for humaning. Good job humaning. Carry on. Not my monkey, not my circus.
Right.
You know?
I can't explain to you why my safe space can't include you, or why their safe space might not be able to include you, even though you support that group of people, because that's just like taking on an ownership of their shared experience that I don't need. Like, I don't need to be the person explaining to you their rules. They have a rule. We accept so many stupid rules to our day-to-day, but the minute someone goes, in order to make me feel safe, I can't have you in the room, then someone wants to stomp and like harumph and be like, don't you know what a good person I am though? And it's like, I do, but you still have to be over there.
Yeah. And that's totally fine and totally okay. And there doesn't need to be like, no one owes anyone any kind of deep philosophical explanation. You know what I mean? Like, we never owe anyone a deep philosophical explanation. And if they want that from us, then tough cookies, you know?
Like, why don't you just go home and meditate on why they didn't want you in their space? Maybe they could smell that you were an asshole. Just go sit with it. Just go sit with it. We are coming up on the hour, and I have learned that sometimes this becomes the longest part of the show, but we have 2 traditions on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before, where we have to talk about what we've learned about existing in a space where this type of human and man also exists with us, and what we've learned about ourselves and what we're hoping for going forward. And then we'll manifest some positivity for them, for the people who are coming into contact with them, for ourselves, for SCOTUS, and maybe they'll get their heads out of the sand. Who's to say?
Nice. Yeah, that's a beautiful tradition, because it takes the shit and turns it into gold. You know what I mean?
I will let you in on a secret. When I came up with this idea, it was with angrier Natalie, and I was like, I would just like to scream about all of the ways that I've been hurt, and I would like to make it comedy, and I would like to make that comedy money. And then I sat with it, and I was like, here's the thing. You also don't want to deal with white supremacy. So maybe you could also spin it to where it's a little positive towards the end. So you have plausible deniability and go, I wasn't just complaining about you. I brought it back at the end and I tried to connect with you on a human level. I beat the game. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd say like the main thing I've learned, we kind of touched on already, but I'll like reiterate it, is that boundary, you know?
Yeah.
Like realizing that no one needs my fixing, like period, like ever. And if I decide to do the work of sitting with someone, sitting with a male presenting human to move through these things, that is a gift that I'm giving, you know, that is emotional labor at the same level of holding, you know, space for a friend who's going through something really deep and challenging, or a client who's like moving through something, you know, that it is it is equivalent to getting paid like $250 an hour to hold space for someone. So recognizing that, like, you know, that boundary is valid and is important, and actually, you know, makes those conversations more potent when I do decide to have them, because I'm not scattering my energy all over the place.
Yeah.
And I'm able to genuinely be a part of change with someone that is sustainable and long-term, as opposed to kind of scattering the seeds everywhere ineffectively. I think that that's one of the biggest lessons, because I used to 100% want to, like, you know, stay in this, quote unquote, stay in the room with like every conversation ever that would ever come up, because I thought that that was the good thing to do and that made me a good person and all this stuff.
Well, and so I think my biggest lesson is, like, not every conversation is my conversation to have, because I love to lean into a conversation. And I also fall into this false sense of security and safety where I feel like, because we're having the conversation, I was respected and listened to. And boy, have I learned that that's not true.
Yeah.
So I think, like, when it comes to my boundaries, I am so aware that I have them, but I also know that I am so avoidant when it comes to reinforcing them that I will just ignore you, or I'll just keep like pushing you off and hoping that you'll go away. So, like, a lesson I could take from this conversation is, well, it is still my responsibility to say, hey, I'm not going to do this with you. I love you. And I hope you find someone who will do this with you, or pay someone to do this with you, but it ain't going to be me today.
Yes. And like, totally clear water saying that, you know, no like guilt, shame, anything. Cause all that's, you know, internalized patriarchy is all the shame that would come with setting that boundary. Yeah.
And then what would you hope for going forward for the collective energy of it all?
Yeah. So it's funny because when I first started exploring, you know, the unseen, the non-physical world, I had in my head an idea of like wanting the conscious woke dude in my life with like the man bun and the, you know, the mala beads and all the things. And like, I had this idea in my head, and I'm so grateful that did not come to pass. And the partnership that I have in my life now is one of the two male presenting humans in my life, where those conversations are always met, you know, with love. And I think that would be my like wish that I would send out, is that when, as a female presenting human, when you speak into something that is problematic or funky, or even just like makes you feel some kind of way and is uniquely problematic to you, it doesn't have to be systemically problematic in order to be problematic, you know, but like when you speak into that it is genuinely heard, genuinely held, and valued for its own sake, you know, that it doesn't have to, you don't have to prove your discomfort to other people. And that, you know, it's taken at face value. Because I think that kind of going all the way back to what we were talking about, humility, I think that that is such a huge gateway, because if you can be heard truly, and like your experience can be taken at face value without being, undermined, then that opens the door to a real conversation that really is healing. Because as soon as that real conversation happens, like that's magic. That's like a true miracle, because on the other side of that conversation, relationships get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. So that would be my wish that I would send out for the world, is like for female presenting humans to feel deeply heard by at least one male presenting human in their lives.
I love that. I think my manifestation that I would like to push out into the ether is, for the sake of male presenting humans, for people who live outside of the binary, for female presenting humans, I would like us all to get to a place where when we see that someone has clearly done all of the face movements that come with like, ooh, I just felt ashamed about something and I want to push it off to someone, but I also don't want to do that because we've learned that that's not cool. And we watch that inner struggle, we make this world an easier place for the mistakes to happen. Because I think that that's where the honesty has to start, where it's like, if we all create a safe space where parents are doing it now with like gentle parenting and conscious parenting, when they're like, I'll never not love you. You spilled some water. It's going to be okay. It has nothing, like my love for you is not something that will dip or get bigger. Like it is just the feeling. So I feel like if we could get that way about success, about growing, about anything, where we understand that it's all, I'm going to be real cliche, it's all a journey. So there are steps, and sometimes those steps will be easier than other steps. And we start celebrating that, we'll get to the point where we're not so product-based, where everyone has to present themselves as a product of their own growth, and instead actually get to celebrate these milestones with people and be like, I see that you're on this part of your journey. Way to fucking go. Here's what I've learned. So I want to make sure that you also know that, because you haven't gotten there yet. And then people can start not feeling so heightened when they have to learn something new, or they have to learn that the game changed, because not everything is ever really set in stone, despite the fact that we love to make rules and regulations in our head to make us feel comfortable.
Nothing is set in stone.
Nothing. At all.
Stone isn't even set in stone.
Exactly. That's a great point. Stone will erode and become sand, and then sand will wash away or get blown away, and all of it. What a great metaphor.
Yeah. Another thought that brought up is like, because you're right. I think it may sound cliche, but it's also fucking true. It's like, it's a journey, and like life is a journey. I used to feel like I needed to fix everything. I need to fix consumerism, I need to fix capitalism, I need to fix patriarchy, I need to fix the whole world and everyone in it. And it's always a newer, bigger problem that presents itself. Like there's always increased complexity. I'm reading a really good book right now called Utopia for Realists.
Okay.
It's great. It talks about like universal basic income, 15-hour work week, all kinds of cool stuff, and how it's like actually like a really great idea. Surprise. And at the beginning of the book, it was talking about how the utopia that we imagined centuries ago is here now. Like the utopia that we dreamed of was really just that food was readily available for most of the population, which it's not readily available for all the global population, but it is readily available for, depending on where you live, most of the population in developed countries, at least, I'll say that. And yet in those same developed countries, there's all kinds of other systemic problems that are just more complex. So there's always going to be a new, bigger, different, more complex problem showing up. And that is the journey. That's life, you know. It's
Yeah.
like one cycle completes and that starts another and that starts another and then we die. So
what's that silly like saying that gets posted on Instagram? Like the only constant thing that we have is change.
Yeah.
Like,
it's so true.
True. And you're right. I say it all the time that like we took everything that we ever wanted as a society when like we started off in the caves and we just like dropped it. Instead of making things easier, we made it insanely hard to be happy in the way that we're living now. And it starts with being honest about these systems that we put into place because we thought it would keep safe what we wanted out of the world. And instead it took what we wanted out of the world and it made it stressful.
It made it harder to find, which like, if you get like metaphysical about it, I know this is going to sound weird to say, maybe not everybody will love this. It made it harder to find, which is like, it reminds me of like, it makes the game more interesting. You know what I mean? It reminds me of like, I don't know. I'm not into kink, but I know someone who is into kink, for example, and like BDSM stuff, right? And for them, they're like, it's because it makes the game of sex more interesting. And it like adds another layer of like complexity to it. And through that challenge, they find deeper pleasure in that experience, right? And I think that like our human experience is kind of the same, where like it gets more complex, but that's also like what makes the human game so interesting, because
that's true.
It's harder and harder to find our sense of self, but when we find it, it's that much more precious.
There you go. I love that. Oh my gosh. This has been a great hour. So the secret behind the podcast is it's really just an avenue for me to make friends. So you are on Team Tolerator forever, Caroline. I hope you're prepared. That's why I email people my number, because I'm like, I hope that they text me all day long, or I'm just going to get into their Instagram DMs. So please know that I love this hour. I can't wait to spend another hour with you. I cannot wait to see where this friendship is going to go and what we learn from one another. Please let all of my listeners know where they can find you and connect with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm no longer on Instagram.
That's okay.
If y'all come hang in the DMs, it will be a little bit crickety. There's like an, homage there to when I was active on the gram, but you can find everything that I'm up to at my website, carolineaddington.com, and through the podcast Co-Create. So like you mentioned at the very beginning, I also do a podcast. Podcasters unite. Like we get along all together so well. We both used to having podcast conversations.
I have so many podcasting friends that like literally keep me off of the edge every day. They like voice message me all day long, just like their thoughts. And they're like, hey, I was noticing that this was rough in the world today. I thought that we'd connect over it. And when I say that I never knew that I would go head first into a community and be so safe in the community that I've created through podcasting, it blows my mind every day.
Podcasters are great. Like, so
all
great.
The time.
Such wonderful humans.
All the time.
Yeah.
And tolerators, you know the drill. There's even a commercial at the top of the show. Follow us at Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram. That's where the link tree is. That's how you get to Fireside, the live show, the Patreon, and all of the fun. Make sure that you're always connecting with me because I love you. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to tolerate, oh my gosh, I messed up my tagline.
You can do it.
I mess it up all the time. Like people should literally keep score at this point. Remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything that you're tolerating, including a human that's come into your space, saw that maybe you did a little work on themselves and wants to prove themselves on top of your work by trapping you in a conversation that you didn't sign up for. Smiles are for joy.